Well, welcome back to Classic Working Vehicles. We're back working on the Unimog 421 restoration. Not this one, it's already done, but the one that I'm working on for a customer.
The cab needed to go off for sandblasting, but before this could be done, I had to laboriously remove all the factory underseal. And there's no shortcut for this, you just have to use a heat gun and a scraper.
So took the cab and various other components off to the sandblasters, and that's all come back and is looking a lot better. But it does reveal obviously where all the corrosion is, and there is plenty of work to do on the cab. Also got the wheels done, and as you can see, painted them up and had the tyres fitted. So that gives us a glimpse really of hopefully how nice the finished vehicle is going to look when it's all done. Well, let's go and get stuck into repairing the cab. So the cab, after being blasted, you can see the sort of thing it really reveals is where the metal is thin, which can look a bit alarming when you first do this with a vehicle. But actually what you know is what's left is sound. So we're not guessing where the corrosion is or hunting for it. Any corroded steel has now gone. But as you can see, we're entirely missing the back wall. Floor panels were rotten. I chopped them out actually before they even went to the sandblasters. And probably one of the largest bits of work that we've got to do is this front corner all the way up to the dash on the passenger side. So some of the front corner panels are still available new, but most of these panels aren't. So that either meant a lot of fabrication to make up these new panels, or trying to repair what was left of the old panels. But after a bit of investigation, I managed to track down another cab. This is actually a 406 cab, and there's a lot of differences between a 406 cab and a 421. The most obvious being that a 406 is wider, but there is also enough common panel work that what I decided to do was purchase this cab and use it as a donor to take some of the panels out. The nice thing about this one is imported from a hot, dry climate. So there's far less corrosion in it than the one that's been in Europe. So what I'm going to do with this one is try and use some of the panel work from this to incorporate into the other cab, particularly this front corner is going to be important to me. Now there are some differences. If we have a look at the panel I removed, you can see probably the most noticeable thing there is there's a big circular hole in the panel from the 421 cab, which is where the snorkel is bolted on, where the air intake happens, and that is missing from this cab. So we're going to have to modify it in various ways, and this top corner's rather different and so on. But it gets us quite a long way there with the repairs. The other, as I say, very noticeable thing with this one is we have no back wall at all. I have kept the old back wall, but it was very rotten. Right, the posts that should be here and the bottom edge of the cab. Whereas this one, it's really very sound. About the best I've seen in terms of lack of corrosion in a Unimog cab of this era. Now, again, the cab is wider, but it's really only this panels here on either side that makes up that extra width. So my plan is to sort of almost dismantle the component panels that this is built out of and then reassemble it to the right dimensions to repair the back of this one. The other thing with this one is the B posts are sound, and they're definitely not on the old cab. So I had the challenge of almost having to weld to fresh air here, and a lot of fabrication work without a donor cab. So in the end, myself and the customer that I'm doing the restoration for sort of worked out that actually we'd probably get a better job and be less expensive to buy a donor cab than to try and fabricate everything from scratch. So this one has had sections cut out of it, and it's got some damage here, but fortunately it's sound in the areas that I need it to be sound. So this corner on this one is good. This area was badly corroded, so I've chopped that out before it was sandblasted. But again, luckily enough, it's pretty good on here. This is actually where the air intake is on a 406. So this will need some panel work welding in here and making good to get rid of that hole. But you know, this shape, it's possible to fabricate it, but it's time consuming to get that looking right. So I think both time and money will be saved doing it this way. Even areas like this where it was rotten and I've had to chop out sections, it's sound on this one. So I can either fold up and make those areas new, or I may just cut it out of this one because I know the profile is correct. So let's make a start. So to be able to work out what area of this cab we need, and I've been calling it a 406, it's actually a 416 cab. Basically a 416 and a 406 are essentially the same. There can be a few differences and they change a little bit over the years, but they're essentially the two are the same. But having got and kept this rather rotten panel out of the 421, so this came from the cab that's now been sandblasted, I can kind of place that over this one. And it's not perfectly accurate, but it gives me an idea of where the area I need and where I need to cut. So what I've done is I've gone around, just traced around this basically. So I can see the areas I need, and then I will cut within that quite generously. So I can then cut it more accurately once it's off the vehicle is the idea. The top of this front corner on a 406 or a 416, well, by the time we get up here is rather different, but this panel is the same. So I should be able to take everything from this corner all the way down to the bottom. I have got a repair section, a brand new repair section to use down here. I think it's going to be needed looking at this, and that can do a repair up to that level. So we should be okay, but initially I'm going to take this out. I have my own sandblasting setup on a smaller scale than the one I take large components to, but what I should be able to do is blast this, see where the corrosion is and what repairs there need to be before I actually fit this to the other cab. And I will cut this out using a combination of plasma cutter and angle grinder, whichever seems easiest really for whichever bit I'm cutting. So let's make a start on this. So this is the front passenger side corner that I've cut out of the donor cab, which is going to replace this panel. It came off the 421 cab. Now we can see the bottom of this donor panel, even though it's much better than the old one with all this top section and things, it is rotten in this bottom corner. So I'm going to also need to make use of one of these replacement corner sections, which goes in somewhere like that. So what I've done, the maximum I can get out of this repair panel is up to this dotted line, but I don't want to commit to that straight away. I want to give myself some margin to work with. So I'm actually going to cut it on the next fold down, effectively on here. I'm going to cut it on where this pressing is rather than anywhere else along here, because where it's got that pressing, when I weld it back together, I'm less likely to get distortion because it's effectively a stiffener that's in there. So I'm going to need this to overcome this corrosion. It's had some sort of repair. I expect that'll become apparent what's happened there. Some sort of repair in its past already, and the water's tracked behind that and corroded it further. So from there up is what I'm wanting. I don't really need this bottom corner, and that's all reasonably sound on the 421 cab. So I need to get this part of the footwell out of the way, but I need to be able to weld back to this panel on the 421 cab. So to be able to do that, disturbing or cutting as little as possible, I need to drill out the spot welds that are here. And to do that, I finally found my spot weld drill. If you've been following the earlier episodes, you know I lost it somewhere, but this is what a spot weld drill looks like. So if you center punch where you want to drill, that little pin picks up on the center punch, that's spring loaded, and as you push down the drill, it pushes back. And then this little hole cutter cuts around the spot weld, and you go along each one, and then you should be able to remove that panel without having drilled all the way through the panel below. So that's what you're left with after you've drilled out the spot welds. So you will get these little raised areas, but you can soon sand them off or grind them off with a flat wheel, which is what I'll do next. With this panel now sandblasted and removed from the back of the old 416 cab, it's wider than the 421 cab, and this is where the width is added. So the pressing here is the same width, which is really handy. It's just that the sheet is larger, a bit wider on the 406 and the 416. So what I can do is find the center of this one, take the measurements of how wide this panel should be off my 421, which is 590 millimeters, and then I'm just marking that up as accurately as I can, and then we'll cut it to the right size for the narrower cab. So after lots of trimming, measuring, checking, I think this is just about ready to fit. But before I do fit it, I'm going to put a bit of weld-through primer. So any steel surfaces that are sandwiched up against each other, clearly, you know, in the original design, that's where the corrosion starts. So a bit of weld-through primer in strategic spots should help reduce the corrosion taking off there again. Oh, hello, Coco. I've measured many times to check that everything is parallel and accurate. At the moment, this middle panel and the outer panel are just clamped on, but I'm really happy with the way it's all lining up. So I think now I will weld it up, or at least this outer piece. So this is what's left from cutting up the donor cab. Now it is tempting to tidy it up and chuck it all away, but I've learned over the years when you're restoring a vehicle, if you've got the space, hang on to everything, even the rotten parts that you've removed from a vehicle, because sometimes you want it as a pattern to be able to make a replacement, or there may still be bits in here that prove to be useful. So all of this I'll just put into a corner for now, and then when the vehicle, or certainly when the cab is finished, I'll work out whether there's anything else here I want to keep, and the rest can go in the scrap. one of the few repair sections you can get for the cab on Unimogs of this era are these front corners, either corner you can get. They're not identical, but they're very close to each other. They will fit a 406, 416, or in this case, a 421 cab. It's going to need to go on something like that. At one time, you could get this whole panel from Mercedes, but they're no longer available unless you happen to be lucky and find some new old stock. So, as you've seen, this is one of the panels I've taken out of a used cab that wasn't suffering too badly from rust. But what I need to do is integrate this repair section into this used panel. And my plan to do that, I've already roughly marked out where the cut line needs to be. So I will cut this, and then on the bench, what I plan to do is tack weld this onto where I think it should be on here, and then trial fit this panel again. It's only held on by clamps at the moment. The reason I want to do it like that is in case there is some misalignment, in case I get something wrong, I can still dismantle it again and rework it, rather than putting it on here and welding it on straight away. Just trying to keep my options open for as long as possible till I commit to actually welding all this up and fitting it. I'm pretty pleased with that. I think we can probably weld that up. So what you're aiming for is, well, what I try and aim for is that no fillers required. You never actually achieve that. It's going to need a tiny little bit in there, but obviously trying to minimize it. So as we know, this came out of the old cab, and it's been a case of measure 2,087 times and cut once. Exaggerating slightly, but getting it accurate. Things like the door pillar. Because if the aperture from the A post to the B post, if the dimensions aren't right or they're not parallel to each other, when the door is hung, the gap is going to be different and it'll show up. So, you know, even though this is a working vehicle, it's a utility vehicle, you still have to treat it in the same way as a car body if you're going to do a nice job with it, and make sure everything is in the right position. So clamping it in lots of places, because things will move a little bit as I weld it through heat expansion. I need to make sure it's well clamped down so nothing unexpectedly shifts from where it should be. And when I weld it on, I'm going to weld it in a few locations around it, and then weld it up fully, rather than try and sort of weld it all one corner and then go to another, because things can shift if you do that. Anyway, time to start welding it up, I think. Well, we're finally at the point where I'd say 95, maybe 99% of the cab repairs are done. But I think I'm probably at the point where I need to wrap it up for this video. Otherwise, you'll be waiting an enormous amount of time before you get another installment. It has been quite an epic undertaking to repair this one, probably the worst I've worked on so far. And the donor cab certainly saved the day. That allowed the process of repair to speed back up again. So all this front corner is replacement from the donor cab, and lots of work along the top here where corrosion had set in. The rail at the front of the bonnet was also badly corroded, as well as you've seen earlier in the video. The footwells, the back wall was entirely missing, and so on. So I've still got a little bit of work to do on the underside. And then when it is upside down, I'm also then going to seam seal the underside and put an overall underseal on there. One, to prevent corrosion. Two, because that's how they were originally done in the factory, so it makes it look like the original inside the engine bay and things. But also it reduces drumming, so some of the vibration in some of the flat panel work and things. So I'll probably show that in a later episode. But it's all in primer now. I'm thinking it probably won't be too long until I put it in top coat, not least because here in the UK at the moment the weather's nice and warm. It's a good time of year to be spraying. So I will probably paint this fairly soon, allow it to harden, then I'll set it aside while I go back to work on the mechanical side of things on the Unimog. So starting to look at the axles, rebuild or build up the chassis, things of that sort. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.